Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking some time out to watch Momentum Talks. I'm Joshna of Your Business Momentum. Today we have Gavin Hodges from Yoonet. Welcome, Gavin.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here today, Gavin. So to kick off, I might just start with a little bit of an introduction to Gavin. Gavin joined Ben and the Yoonet team in bringing more of the business process improvement and automation solutions to our clients. Prior to joining Yoonet, he was director of a large diversified civil, commercial and property development business for over a decade. His skills lie in understanding the multifaceted nature of business operations at a scale and the unique challenges that are faced by owners in attempting to grow while managing the inevitable cost escalation in the Australian context. So once again, Gavin, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
The purpose of Momentum Talks is to share valuable content with business owners and who can help you overcome challenges in your business. So today we're going to talk about how to leverage offshore talent to improve business performance. I'm going to fire off a few questions to Gavin and get him to share some of his insights with us today. So Gavin, let's get started.
Sure.
Question one, Gavin, what might be a crazy or an amazing statistic that's relevant to offshoring talent that others might not know about?
Yeah, look, it's probably the general scale of the offshore industry. Obviously for us, it's the Philippines context. The industry is massive. It employs about 1.2 million Filipinos, generates about $25 million annually in terms of revenue to the Philippines. And the scary statistic is that it's expected to double by the end of 2020. So if you want to see the power of compounding, I'd suggest you have a look at the growth of the BPO industry in the Philippines over the last decade. It's massive. And what's probably more pertinent to our context is that Australian business is actually the second largest consumer of Philippines business process outsourcing services in the world, second only to the US, which when you consider the respective or the relative sizes of the respective economies, it's a pretty big number. It's a very mature industry and certainly growing. From the Australian side, and you've got 97% of businesses in Australia employ less than 19 people. So I think it's fair to assume that there's a lot of SMEs taking advantage of the offshore approach into the Philippines. And it's certainly one that a lot are having great success with.
Gavin, that's some pretty impressive stats there. I guess, for me, it's all the pointers to the fact that, this is such a growing area and why as small to medium business owners, we really need to be giving this some attention and looking at, how we can leverage using offshore talent. So what would be, from your perspective, Gavin, the 2 or 3 major problems that arise for business owners who are looking to outsource staff?
The biggest challenge we come across, and it all lends to, we're really focused on sustainable offshoring. There's a lot of people get excited about offshoring. They see the arbitrage and labour costs. They think, wow, I need a new accountant. Why don't I go offshore and have a look? It works in some contexts, but the biggest challenges we find is the unstructured nature of the work that they're trying to outsource. So we're outsourcing or offshoring, used interchangeably in this context, really comes into its own is when there is existing digital business process or workflows established within the business that are robust, that are highly repeatable, and that rely on the system or the process rather than the person to execute. So a lot of people do a lot of ad hoc type work. They don't manage necessarily how they're going to task the VA. It becomes quite a chore and quite a challenge. Obviously with the VA on the other side of the world, it can be it has its own challenges. So to mitigate against that, the biggest benefit we see, or the way to mitigate that, is to really focus firstly on making sure the business is process or systems dependent. by building out a really, really good solid digital workflow. And then looking to the VA to execute that workflow, because the workflow can be housed anywhere in our context, beautiful Belanga, Philippines. But once it's there, it's then a matter of being able to task the VA to execute a very rock solid, robust digital process. So, I mean, that's the number one challenge. People are just a little bit too unstructured in what their expectations are around execution. So, look, I think it's a good business process anyway to make sure your business is systems dependent, because it certainly increases the consistency of outcome, and it reduces the complexity of the person, or the talent required to deliver it. You can imagine in an accounting process, I'm sure it's a familiar story for a lot of people out there, that, you know, there's one individual that has a lot of the information, a lot of knowledge. When that person's on holiday or goes away, it becomes very hard. It either doesn't get done, or the business owner steps in to do the process. So getting the business into that mindset of process and systems dependency allows the VA to excel, because they're tasked appropriately without a lot of onshore direction, but also allows you to find, you know, burstable talent, because you're not looking for very high skilled necessarily people. You're looking for great process people that can execute process consistently. That's the number one. The other big area that we see a lot of people struggling to save cost. They're lured by this idea that, hey, I can get cheap labour. It's not a cost-saving process in our mind. In our world, it's about growth, and it's about reducing the cost of your growth. So you can imagine, in the context of an Australian business, if you're looking to employ the next salesperson, that could be a $60,000 or $100,000 decision. What we say is, well, hang on a minute, maybe we could be a bit more resourceful here. Maybe we can find process, maybe we can find opportunity to turn that $60,000 or $100,000 decision into a $20,000 decision or a $15,000 decision. Not necessarily by employing that person, but by finding process that your existing sales staff or some other person in that business that's doing high value work, if we can take the low value stuff off them and put that into a structured workflow administered by a VA, it becomes a growth discussion and allows you to make that growth decision as a business owner without having to have this massive step change or this massive capital contribution, or, you know, it might be a new system that you want to put in place. Well, it may not need to be. We might be able to get your existing system more resourceful by putting process about it and putting some VAs on.
Okay. So what I'm hearing out of that, Gavin, you know, for people that are looking at outsourcing, you need to have, number one, your processes in place, because when you do outsource, it's really important that whoever you're outsourcing to is able to follow the process that you have in place to be able to get the efficiencies that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Efficiency is number one, consistency of outcomes number two, and what you don't want to do is you don't want to waterbed. You don't want to push down on one side just to create a challenge somewhere else. So it's very much about making sure that the offshore labour resource is very much not taking up additional time onshore just to manage. You've got to rely on the process to manage the person to really leverage the true value of an offshore approach.
It's a good point you're making there, Gavin, because I know often when we walk into a business, there tends to be total chaos. So often we see processes in people's heads where, you know, it might be a couple of key people that understand how to do something really well, but it's not documented. There's no systemization in any way. So for those types of businesses, I suspect it would be first and foremost getting your processes in order before you even look to outsource, just so that you get some of those efficiencies and the growth that you're looking for.
100%. I think, you know, the beauty of the technology out there in the world is technology is a really confusing space for a lot of SMEs, and it's an incredibly confusing space because there's just so much option. So, you know, one of the things that we do internally is make sure that we have a select set of sort of tools that we use to help businesses systemize and process, you know, to build that process dependency. But the technology is really it's what's leveraging the opportunity here. It's about technology. If you get the technology right, you can get really good process in place, really repeatable, and that's a real focus. So the traditional BPO approach, hey, I need an accountant, the BPO will go and find your accountant. all sorts of talent available from grads to 10-year experience, CPAs. But it's the layer, or the real layer that a lot of that's missing is this concentration on sustainability, making sure that you get the process right. And that's where the technology piece comes in, to sort of support that process.
Okay. And we might have touched a little bit on this before, Gavin, but, keen to just get some insights from you on how business owners can use outsourcing to improve their business performance. What are some of the successes and things that you've seen?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a range of all sorts of different roles that work well in the VA context. The more complex the role, the more robust the system needs to be to execute it. But if we look at, the traditional one, probably the biggest that most people look to is the bookkeeping type world, largely because the world of Xero and QuickBooks and things like that sort of control for a bit of that complexity. You're administering a really robust cloud-based system in any case. Where the challenges around, say, bookkeeping come on is well, how do I get the invoice into the system? How do I task my VA that, hey, I've got a new email, I've got a new invoice, I've got a new timesheet, whatever the process happens to be. But certainly, keeping is probably by far the largest sector or section of the offshoring industry, certainly in the Philippines context. But there's other areas too. A lot of marketing. If you've got some, you're running a lot of Google ads, or you're running you're doing a lot of outbound type communication around developing ads or those sorts of things. This is also a skill set. We have AutoCAD operators that do 3D renders for clients. We have businesses that do all their quoting. So a quote or a request for a quote will land onshore. Offshore it goes. There's a bunch of process around them building out that quote, building out the marketing material to support it, and then sending that on direct to the client. So any process that requires anything that can be developed into a bit of a following the bouncing ball type mentality, it is ideal for offshoring. So anything that's repeatable, that's high value but time consuming, is kind of the three things you need to get. Things that don't work well in the VA world are client-facing roles. So anything that's really client-facing and client interactions, not so good. It requires a lot of time, energy, effort into the talent to be able to get a really good result there. So most of it's around back of office type process, everything from accounts through to quoting, through to CRM administration. So we see a lot of small business have great technology, but they're so busy they can't actually leverage the technology because they get the new CRM in there, they keep it updated for the first 3 or 4 months, everything's going well, and then of course they get busy and the processing behind that, the clients get duplicated, the missing data, the whole benefit of some of these systems erodes because the data in it isn't kept up to date. So anything involving CRM, resource management around contacts and things like that, really well suited to the VA world. There's all sorts of other more knowledge-based roles, but for us, certainly in an SME context, stick to the highly repeatable, still high value, they need to be done, but there's a lot of it because when there's high volume, that's when you can get the real labour arbitrage.
Okay. So if I just pull some key things out of there, Gavin, I heard you say outsourcing for mainly back office type functions, things that are high volume and repeatable.
Correct.
Okay, beautiful. So Gavin, it's probably a good time for you to maybe just tell us a little bit about the outsourced services you provide and what Yoonet's known for.
Sure. There's really two areas, and we've touched on it earlier, the assistance in the development of the technology to support the VA. So we provide services around building digital workflow. So assessing an existing process, remapping that into a digital process, and then obviously finding the labour that's appropriate to execute that process. So we have quite an established recruitment process that we go through. We have great access to talent. One of the other staggering statistics of the Philippines is that half of the population is under the age of 23. So there's this enormous growth. There's 100 million people. It's 50 million people under the age of 23 who come out very well educated. English is the first language. So, or English is, an official language. So, you got great English. You've got a 2-hour time zone. It's the same time zone as Perth. looking to sort of get into there. So we have some really good recruitment channels. We find the right person, induct them into our business, into our client's business, and then support the client on the journey of developing the VA.
I know certainly in our experience, Gavin, of using VA support now for about 10 years, the icing on the cake is just they're such beautiful people. They really want to be a part of something, and you know, they give off their best. That's certainly been in our experience.
Yeah, I think that's true of the majority of the Filipino population. It's a very I think it's just the nature of, you know, they're very, very excited to have a great opportunity. BPO work for the Filipino is a really, it's where you want to end up as a young person coming out of university. It's very, very sought after. So you get great talent. They're very appreciative of the job, very appreciative to be there, and the general demeanour is just a very happy, contented bunch. So it's a very different context to the Australian context, certainly in my experience at least, and there's a lot of benefits.
Beautiful. So Gavin, if we've got anyone listening to Momentum Talks that have questions, how could they best reach you?
Oh, the best is just via the email, gavin@yoonet.com.au. Happy to jump on and answer anything they have, and yeah, absolutely, you can certainly go a little deeper into some of these areas if they have interest, for sure.
Beautiful. Well, Gavin, thank you for joining me on Momentum Talks. For the listeners out there, I'm sure you can sort of, you know, see the wealth of experience that Gavin has in this space. So again, the email is gavin@yoonet.com.au if you did have any further questions. Yoonet is spelt Y-O-O-N-E-T. Also, please take a few short minutes now to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. If you are interested in finding out when we do have more Momentum Talks, and this is where we interview industry professionals, subject matter experts to provide something valuable to you. Thank you again, Gavin, and thank you to our listeners out there, and until next time, all the best.
Thanks very much, Joshna.
Thank you.